Idaho Matters podcast is brought to you by St. Luke's On Demand Virtual Care, which allows patients to see a provider from their home using a computer or smartphone with on demand care for common ailments such as a cough, sore throat, or a sinus issue. More information at stlukesonline.org.
Hundreds of bills move through the Idaho legislature each session, and it can be hard to keep track of what's really at stake. The Connector follows the legislation that's gaining traction with clear reporting and local context you can trust. Stay connected to the State House with The Connector, Idaho Daily News. Listen wherever you get your podcasts.
From the studios of Boise State Public Radio News, I'm Gemma Gaudette. This is Idaho Matters. We've heard a lot of stories about wolf recovery here in Idaho, even about grizzly bear recovery and bringing buffalo back to the West. What we haven't heard much about, though, is how they all work together on the landscape and how important it is for these animals to coexist with each other. Now, many of the people who are working to keep these animals in the West are actually working together, and they're hosting a series of talks called Coexistence. Stories from wolf, grizzly bear, and buffalo country. From Ketchum to Boise, they are spreading the word about why coexistence is so important. And they're joining us today to share more of their wisdom with us. So joining us now are Dallas Gudgel, Yankton, Dakota member of the Fort Peck Tribes and co-director of the Buffalo Field Campaign, Ed Kennedy, a Sawtooth Wilderness backcountry expert and wildlife photographer, and Suzanne Aisha Stone. She is co-founder of the Wood River Wolf Project. I'd like to welcome all three of you to the program today.
Oh, wonderful. Thanks for having us.
Yes, thank you.
It's a privilege to be here, Gemma.
Oh, well, so nice to have all of you with us. And Suzanne, let me begin the conversation with you today. Can you start us off with the Wood River Wolf Project? What is it, and how did it come about?
The Wood River Wolf Project is based in Blaine County, but it really got started because of a bit of a train wreck. We had wolves showing up on the landscape for the first time in historic memory. Generations had passed since the last wolves were in Idaho before they restored the wolves in the 1990s. And shortly after that, about 8 years later, a wolf pack called the Phantom Hill Pack took up residence in Blaine County. And we suddenly had what Yellowstone folks had been enjoying for a long time, a family of wolves that we could watch raising their pups on the hillsides just outside of Ketchum. And we had lots of people out there with their big cameras and everything, just really enjoying getting to see these wolves raising their pups. But unfortunately, the information had not reached the local ranching community. And we had semi trucks pull up with thousands of sheep and livestock guardian dogs into the same drainage where the wolves were raising their young. And suddenly we had a huge conflict because no one was ready for that. So we were able to work with the ranchers. And after that initial conflict, we'd be able to help them prepare for having wolves back on the landscape by having the right tools in place, having a good understanding of where the wolves were. And we began training field technicians to help assist the herders so they could best protect the sheep. And that was almost 20 years ago. So now we've gone through this many years. It's the largest example of coexistence with wolves and sheep anywhere in the United States, probably anywhere in the world. And we just had a highlight at the IUCN, the international conference featuring all the scientists around the world coming together in Dubois, where the Wood River Wolf Project was one of the coexistence projects that was highlighted during this enormous international conference. So our little work here in Idaho has really changed the landscape for wolves around the world, since we now know the types of tools and methods like using livestock guardian dogs, knowing where the wolves are denning, having different sites, sound devices, lighting devices, things like that, that help give the wolves a sense of buffer where they don't belong and help us to protect the sheep and cattle in places where those do belong. So it's just been an exciting long ride, but it's really taught us a lot about living with wolves on the landscape. And in the last 3 years, we've had 0 losses of sheep, but out of the 20,000 we normally have in our project area, we lose less than 5 sheep overall every year to wolves because these methods work so well.
So, Dallas, you also have a piece of legislation that you're trying to get through Congress. Can you talk to us about the Tribal Heritage and American Bison Grizzly Bear and Wolf Restoration Act? What would this do if passed?
Yeah, thanks, Gemma. This bill was introduced in September of 24 by Senator Cory Booker in the Senate, and it was also introduced on the House side by the late Raul Grijalva. And what this piece of legislation does is it protects these three species at the same level as golden and bald eagles. So outside of the Endangered Species Act, it recognizes these animals, these my relatives is as a Lakota person, these are my relatives, and it recognizes these relatives as uh, they have an intrinsic value on the landscape. They have a place in the wild and in the landscape, and it protects them at that level of golden and bald eagles. And it also promotes tribal co-stewardship of these species. There are some provisions for identifying potential habitat and migratory corridors, connectivity. It does a lot of things, but primarily the protection of these animals at a level that's higher than the Endangered Species Act is what we like, and it honors tribal treaty rights, tribal treaty purposes, tribal sovereignty at the same time, because we co-evolved with buffalo and we co-evolved and coexisted with all three of these species for thousands of years, a millennia or more. And it's important to have them return to their rightful place and have some of, I think, tribal management of these species so that we can restore biodiversity and they can have their place in the wild as it's meant to be.
Dallas, you mentioned tribal co-stewardship. So I do want to dig more into that because this tribal shared stewardship is a big part of this bill. And you have made a point that government agencies don't always talk to each other. And this can end up being a pretty big problem. So how can tribal stewardship help overcome that issue?
One of the things, as you say, is that the colonial structure that we're under in probably at least a half a dozen different land use management agencies spread around the Department of Interior and Department of Agriculture are not really talking to one another. And these siloed structures, the idea that they're managing wildlife in one particular set of public lands differently than they're managing wildlife in the adjacent one. Take Yellowstone Park, for example. You've got the Park Service managing in one way these three species, and the Forest Service managing in a different way. So this siloed, fragmented structure is not working, and it's not helping these animals to thrive in their habitat. It restricts access to their habitat. Whereas tribal management, if we had a coalition of tribes following some of our historic ways of managing, which is holistic and looking at the entire ecosystem, the entire bioregion, and managing those ecosystems in a holistic way, understanding and recognizing the complex interconnectivity and managing for the overall ecological health of an entire ecosystem. That is the type of management, that holistic type of ecological health management as the goal that I believe we'd all benefit from if that type of
Mhm.
management structure was in place.
So, Ed, you actually made working together a really big part of your career in the Forest Service. I mean, in fact, you helped Wood River Valley skiers and snowmobilers get along back in the 1990s. And you even worked really hard to help create the Boulder White Clouds Wilderness Initiative. So, how important is it to try to get everyone to work together to preserve these three species?
Oh, I think it's imperative, Gemma. Coexistence isn't that hard. It really isn't, if we pay attention. And all three of these species are they're iconic, of course, but the power of these three species is undeniable. For a lot of people, the very first time they ever see a grizzly in the wild is burned indelibly into their memory. And that connection that we could have with these animals if we just put the effort into coexisting is well worth it. And we do that by talking to each other, by taking a few simple steps, and it's just really not that hard. And I think we owe it to the natural community to make those efforts.
And Ed, when you retired, my understanding is that you really wanted to work on helping grizzly bears recover. So tell us how the bears are doing right now.
Well, the Bears have definitely expanded their numbers. They've reoccupied some of their former range. They still occupy about 2% of their historic range, I believe is the correct figure. Um, so there's a lot of habitat they could occupy, and I'm an advocate of allowing them to do it naturally. The bears will find a way. And so while they are recovering, there's still island populations like Yellowstone. The greater Yellowstone ecosystem population is uh, separated from the Northern Rockies population, and so you don't have that genetic mixing. The gene pool isn't reinvigorated. So those animals will slowly be on a downward spiral with in their genetic vitality,
Mm.
and so taking steps that allow them to intermix with other populations, where you have like the Yellowstone to Yukon Coalition is trying to do, trying to establish corridors where they can all intermix and keep that population healthy. Those are things that have to happen in the long term.
And Ed, my understanding is that you still spend a lot of time in the Sawtooth Wilderness. So, what do you see? I mean, literally on the ground when it comes to these species coexisting together.
Well, I'll say I spend a lot of time in wilderness, period. Now that I'm not a full-time field-going ranger on the Sawtooth National Recreation Area, I spend a lot of time in the wilderness of Montana and Wyoming and Canada and Alaska. And in the Sawtooth Wilderness, we don't have bison or grizzly bears. So, but we do have wolves, and you see wolves to the extent they're allowed to in Idaho these days, playing the natural role that they've always played. But beyond the Sawtooth Wilderness, beyond our local backyard wilderness from us here in Blaine County, um, it's really gratifying for me, a wilderness and wildlife lover, to watch these animals play their natural role. And so that's the objective of my entire life these days.
So, Dallas, why is the idea of tribal management of wolves and grizzlies and buffalo more, in your opinion, more holistic than the way it's being done right now?
I believe that the siloed structures of the setup we have in the colonial system is it does not manage for overall ecological health. And so what it does is ignores sort of the interconnectedness of all things. This is something we talk about in Lakota culture, and of the 500 tribes across the U.S., there is a common theme that we have an understanding that all things are connected, and that is the management structures. Those are the historical management structures um, that we implement using fire and all sorts of things. And this is the season for storytelling. And so that's how a lot of this gets passed down, a lot of this traditional ecological knowledge. And so in this storytelling season, we have 4 months and we talk about the overall ecological health of everything in the winter season when we can sit around and the fire and those are how a lot of these stories are passed down. So it talks about us being on the landscape and being a keystone species ourselves and being part of the environment. We're going to tell those stories this week, Wednesday at the Bound Crossing Library at 6 to 7:45. Some of those stories. So this is the storytelling season, and the December moon is the moon of popping trees. We have 4 moons in the winter because there are 13 moons that we recognize. January is the hardship moon. That's when the snow's deep. And some of these species, like wolves, thrive in the January moon. And then the February moon is the moon of red calves, the dark red calves of the buffalo. And then the March moon, when we're still telling stories, is the snow blindness moon. We recognize this time of storytelling and we get to pass down this traditional ecological knowledge of what it is like to be a part of nature rather than separate from it, which is a colonial structure that seems to me is failing.
Ed, based on what you see in the wilderness, do you believe these animals really can live together on the landscape?
Oh, absolutely, Gemma. They did for literally hundreds of thousands of years, long before the presence of humans in North America, and they evolved together. So absolutely, yes.
And Suzanne, I know earlier in the conversation you mentioned that this last season you didn't lose any sheep, right? And normally you lose about 5, which is such an incredibly low number. So, what kind of success rate would you say that the Wood River Wolf Project has had, especially over this 20 years of this project being in place?
Yeah, it's been consistent over that 20-year, even though we've had the learning curve of being the first ones to try this on a large landscape anywhere, probably in the world. And so we've learned a lot. And we're learning from the wolves. We're learning from the sheep. We're learning from all the critters that are out there. We even have wolverine in our project area. We have such an incredible biodiverse ecosystem in the area where the wolves are at that it's just remarkable to see all these different species and how they coexist in ways that we could always be jealous of because it is it's in everyone's best interest to be fulfilling their role to um, have this incredible biodiversity. It strengthens the entire ecosystem as a whole, so it makes it life better for all of them, all the species that are part of that. So when we plan these events where we've had them at the libraries, and it's all about the storytelling, and some of it's about our personal stories. At the last one, Ed talked about accidentally finding himself on the playground of 3 young grizzly bear cubs and
Mm.
having mama right across the pond. And when those cubs found Ed in their playground, they weren't real happy about it. And Ed knows the bears well enough to know how to behave in their ecosystem, in
Mm.
their home. A lot of us don't know, we don't have the exposure to nature on a daily basis. When I was a kid, I was kind of a feral kid. I spent more time out in nature than I did probably, paying attention to my schoolwork or anything like that because I just loved it. It was such an important part of what brought me joy of being able to see all these different species out there. And so when we hold this event Wednesday night at the Bound Crossing Library, it's going to be the last one in our series of sharing these personal stories. What is it like to encounter wolves in the backcountry and howl with them under a full moon. I mean, that was one of the things that first started me as an intern working on wolves here in the state almost 40 years ago. So we can't wait to share these stories with everyone and to hear the stories from others. I think that's a lot of what we're missing as people is this, these animals are connected to each other in a way that is timeless. It goes way beyond, is what Ed was saying, thousands and thousands of years. As humans, we don't have often enough exposure, I think, to being in nature, understanding nature, knowing it well enough to know how to coexist ourselves with these native species.
And Suzanne, have the methods that you've worked on to stop the wolf attacking sheep, right, and being able to live together, have they been useful in other places, or I mean, could they be? I mean, are there other organizations using this template that you've created?
It's incredible. Our model's been picked up around the world and in places that we know about. Like I was on the ground working in Israel, standing on the Israel-Syrian border, howling with a wolf that was in Syria, right? And in between us was a minefield. And the wolves have come back because the minefield is there and is a safer place for them to be than out in the open where there are people.
Hmm.
So it's incredible around the world. There's all kinds of places that are adopting the Wood River Wood Project model of coexistence, which is why we founded the International Wildlife Coexistence Network, and I'm the director of that organization. It's we're hearing from people, and we get to work with people that are working on snow leopards in Nepal, or elephant in India, um, tigers and the lions, all of those things. A lot of these species are being pushed into some of the last available habitat for them in the world. And because of that, we're seeing the loss of biodiversity on a massive scale. There's so much we can do to stop that. And as started that becomes a part of our understanding, just an awareness of what do these animals need in order to thrive alongside of us. And they certainly can. So that'll be part of the stories that we share and continue to share, helping people understand the value of these animals on the landscape, the roles that they fill, which are important to our long-term, our food supplies, our the diversity of crops that we have, the pollinators that are out there. All of those things, as Dallas said, are so tied and woven together, and gaining that understanding, being able to look at what's happening in our own backyards, knowing that these native plants are the only thing that actually create enough food for birds, native birds, to be able to reproduce and have their own fledglings in the springtime. They can't. We could put a million pounds of earthworms out there. They can't eat those. They depend on these native caterpillars in order to hatch their own fledglings. And if they don't have them, they can't. So the more we know about nature and its miracles and its beauty and our relationship with it, the more we can help better protect the resources that we have locally, and to connect ourselves back to this system that has been supporting humanity since been on the planet.
And Dallas, there's a term that I would love for you to talk a little bit about, and this is bioregions. Can you tell us what it is, and why do you believe we need to start thinking in terms of bioregions?
Take Yellowstone, for example. This is one of our traditional areas for depending on who you talk to, 29 to 49 tribes. This was part of their homeland territory in one way or another. And in Yellowstone Park, the northern 2/3 of the park, um, that all drains out to the Mississippi River, and the bottom third of the park that drains to the Pacific Ocean. And so we have right there the headwaters of two different bioregions. And so as we're looking at water scarcity, with climate warming and a few other things, and the biggest loss of biodiversity that we've ever encountered, as humans, as we've been here. Um, this bioregion, we have 10 million acres of public land around the Yellowstone. 2 million of those acres are the park itself, and then there's a bunch of Forest Service land around it, 8 more million acres. That is an ecosystem all on its own, the Greater Yellowstone ecosystem. It's part of a larger bioregion. Actually, it's part of 2 bioregions because you've got drainages running to the Gulf of Mexico and drainages running to the Pacific Ocean. So understanding how these ecosystems work and understanding how these bioregions work is probably the scale we need to be looking at if we're going to curb climate warming and curb the loss of biodiversity.
And Ed, you get to see some of these bioregions in action. I mean, literally, when you're out in the wilderness like the Sawtooth, do you believe they can work? I mean, if we as humans get out of the way?
Again, Gemma, they worked for tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of years before. So yes, they can work. And I think it's important for us to ask ourselves, can we as a species coexist with these other iconic species that they don't challenge us? They just want to be left alone to be what they are. A grizzly bear never wants to be an astronaut. They never want to be more than what they are. They just want to be left alone to be able to live the lives that they evolved to live. So yes, clearly they can coexist. We can coexist with them. Millions of people live in close proximity to grizzly bears from Jackson Hole all the way to the North Slope of Alaska through Whitehorse and Anchorage and Haines, and people do it. It just takes some consideration that these species deserve.
Well, I want to thank all of you so much for taking time to talk with us today and just giving us such an education on this. We've been speaking with Dallas Gudgel, Yankton, Dakota member of the Fort Peck Tribes. He's also the co-director of the Buffalo Filled campaign. Ed Kennedy joined us as well. He is Sawtooth wilderness backcountry expert and a wildlife photographer. And Suzanne Aisha Stone, she is co-founder of the Wood River Wolf Project. They will all be at the Bound Crossing Library in Southeast Boise this Wednesday, February 4th, from 6 to 7:45 p.m. as they share more of these stories and their expertise. I'm Gemma Gaudette, and this is Idaho Matters.
Hi, it's Terry Gross, host of Fresh Air. Hey, take a break from the 24-hour news cycle with us and listen to long-form interviews with your favorite authors, actors, filmmakers, comedians, and musicians, the people making the art that nourishes us and speaks to our times. So listen to the Fresh Air podcast from NPR and WHYY.